Hi, I'm Jenny Jennings. I'm a theatre and festival maker based in Dublin, and I'm also the co-founder and co-director of This Is Pop Baby Theatre Company.
Hi Jenny, thanks a million for taking part in this. I suppose one of the things, kind of looking back on what you've done, in many of those roles, is I'm fascinated about how one gets to there. So, like when you were a child, kind of growing up, was the theatre or event, was that kind of something you were kind of fascinated from an early age, or what were you like growing up?
Oh yeah, 100%. I was that kid who started rehearsing the family Christmas show in September. I gathered all the neighborhood to do, big gala dance routines for charity. I wrote plays and the school performed the plays to the whole school. So I was absolutely a complete theatre nut. I wanted to be an actor. That's what I was saying very confidently from a very early age. I was in Betty Ann Norton, I was in the Gaiety Youth School, and I was in Dublin Youth Theatre. And then my life took a very dramatic turn left. So there was my family just completely broke apart, and there was a lot of trauma, and I ended up leaving home while still in school. And I kind of left Dublin Youth Theatre and left all the extracurricular activities, and really that segue, which led me very much into club culture and creating an alternative family on the dance floor, and that has been the making of me, actually, because I was going along in a very straight line, and around a very small circle in terms of type of people. And my whole world exploded, and my entire philosophy really started building there on the dance floors. And it's where I became, I guess it was always in me, but it was where I became really passionate about equality and about diversity, and very, very specifically about where art and underground culture could meet. That was fascinating to me. And so I kind of popped out the other side of that, borderline degenerate decade. and I went back to college. I went to UCD. I had previously gone to Ballyfermot to do a journalism course, and then gone traveling for a few years. Then I went back to UCD, and from UCD it was an MA in cultural policy, and I did an internship there with Corn Exchange Theatre Company, and so suddenly, I was back in the world of theatre, and actually that wasn't that conscious. I was kind of looking for an internship in a festival, actually, but this came up in Corn Exchange Theatre Company, and that was the start of me. That was the start of my career in professional theatre.
Okay, wow, that's brilliant. I mean, brilliant story there. And I think what's interesting though is, like, going right back, there's so many people. Geez, I mean, the quality of Christmas shows and houses around the country, is probably not to be underestimated. But that sense of, both the actor and the organizer, and then I say kind of, taking a run into more kind of club culture and then popping out the other side. But the equality piece and the social justice piece, or the inclusion piece, like when you were doing the cultural policy, what was kind of, were you framing that as you kind of went, Jenny? What was it, something that was kind of was that something that you're following your nose down a rabbit hole about, or was it something that you're kind of interested in?
It was definitely an evolving perspective, and there's a thesis as part of that course, an academic thesis. And so I wrote my thesis after a few false starts. I decided, no, I should write my thesis about something that I'm passionate about. So I wrote it about electronic music, and I wrote it about the creative space and the cultural space and the cultural policy space, where high art digital music meets underground club culture. and with a focus on the Dublin Electronic Arts Festival, which was an incredible festival that showcased both of these things in tandem, and often collaborators from makers from both. So now you see this everywhere, you know, like you see Jeff Mills, who's an originator of Detroit techno, playing with the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. You know, you see all these kind of collaborations. It's really undisputed now that electronic music in all its forms is a follow-on from classical music, or is an offshoot of classical music, particular forms of classical music. But when I wrote my thesis, it wasn't an accepted truth at all. So that was very exciting. So that's how I kind of framed this preoccupation with that creative and cultural space.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, you know, there's things you were rightly say that are kind of normative now, but even when, you know, when you were emerging out of that, you know, space and into kind of This Is Pop Baby and other stuff that wasn't, you know, mainstream, for want of a horrible word, you know, like back then. I think there's a really interesting, would like to kind of unpack a bit about kind of how you felt like when you were kind of, say, running away with the circus of, you know, the club scene. Like, what, you know, was there an emergent there kind of going, Jesus, the art forms that I'm kind of, you know, coming up against here, whether it be, you know, design, fashion, music, whatever it is, or lifestyle, in fact. When did your brain start going, oh, there's something bigger here for me?
It's difficult to pinpoint, but I know what my visceral reaction was to seeing the Corn Exchange, for example, suddenly come on stage in the middle of a house club in the Ormond Multimedia Centre in the mid-90s, you know, and it was just such an extraordinary mashup, really, but it worked so well. And that club, which was founded by Niall Sweeney and Tony Walsh, was really, you know, a huge influence on me. And then later on, Electric Picnic really did the same thing, but writ large. So, I mean, Electric Picnic was so extraordinary and unique in Ireland, but of course it was modelled on Glastonbury, you know, albeit a kind of more comfortable Glastonbury. but I hadn't been to Glastonbury at the time, and to kind of see a space where people engage with these very, you know, popular music forms, but also would find themselves wandering into a avant-garde late night, you know, circus performance, whilst, you know, the most, you know, non-arty people would be dressed up in the most fun way and ridiculous way. I thought that was incredible, and I thought that there was enormous power to that. And so I started applying this thinking, I suppose, to the theatre world, where I was back working in. I was working in an administrative role at the time with the Corn Exchange. And none of my friends who were so into Electric Picnic, they were into, you know, pop art exhibitions down at IMA. They had massive record collections, you know, they're really culturally engaged people. Theatre wouldn't even be on their radar. You know, they would never darken the door of the theatre. And if they did, you know, they probably wouldn't go back, because it just wouldn't chime with them in the same way that the other forms did at the time. That's a gross generalization.
No, I hear you.
You know, but in general, and I've always been passionate about theatre. And in 2006, I was a judge in Dublin Fringe, and I saw this play, the debut play by Philip McMahon, and it was a site-specific piece in the Pod nightclub in Dublin. It was called Danny and Chantal Still Here, and it did all of the things that Electric Picnic did. It did all of the things that Dublin Electronic Arts Festival did, which was that in content, in context, and in communication, it just really spoke to people's lives. At that point, we're talking about youth culture, really, you know. And it was excellent. You know, there was no compromising on the writing was excellent, the performances were excellent, the direction was excellent. It went on and it won the biggest prize in the Fringe that year. And a couple of months later, I approached Philly and I said, look, I would just like to do whatever it takes to get that show back on. And so that's how we started working together.
Wow. I mean, it's gas because, like, just to go back a bit before we kind of explore the beginnings of This Is Pop Baby, but I don't think enough is spoken about that Ormond Multimedia Centre. I remember that back in the day, and Jesus Christ, it was the most eclectic mix of people doing very different. You could have, I mean, I remember being in there, you know, rehearsing plays and, you know, doing auditions for plays while, you know, there'd be, I just say, a lot of music, kind of, you know, digital music going on in other rooms, and just that sense of around that time in Dublin, there were those spaces. Like the City Arts Centre was another one where there was kind of just this eclectic mix of people around hubs, which, you know, was very, very different. And it wasn't called anything, you know what I mean? It just happened to be that they were all in the same space. And the amount of things that have kind of born out of those places has been incredible. But Danny and Chantel, I mean, yeah, a brilliant piece. I mean, I remember myself back in the day, and it was just, you know, extraordinary. And I suppose for you then going, okay, this is kind of, I have this instinct, this is kind of the type of work that, you know, I want to be, you know, facilitating or making or being part of or producing. So how did that then operationally happen for you for the first while, Jenny? What kind of emerged out of that?
So I was just about to do this incredible marketing course called Druidstone Marketing, which Theatre Forum facilitated. And I went down and did that. It was a week-long residential course. It was a UK model that Theatre Forum had brought over. And I used the course to devise this really excellent marketing campaign for Danny and Chantel. And meanwhile, because I didn't have full producing theatre chops, I approached Cian O'Brien, who I had gone to the MA in UCD with. He was working, I think he was like an associate with Rough Magic at the time. And so he came on board. And then Louise Kiley, who had produced the original run, was also in the mix there. So it's kind of four of us that became three of us, which was myself, Philly, and Cian. So Cian O'Brien is an original pop baby, which, you know, is often kind of forgotten about. But he was an original pop baby for a good few years, and I would lead on the marketing and some of the producing, and Cian would lead on the producing. And then, I mean, Philly has a great producerial head on him anyway. But we were following the rabbit hole in the first few years of kind of his writing and his artistic impulse.
Yeah.
And then the actual, like, we got a small grant from Dublin City Council for Danny and Chantel. We had to make up a name for the company. So that's, you know, things were just born out of necessity, really.
Yeah.
And for Danny, when we did Danny and Chantel, we brought, I think it was something like 60 or 70% new audiences into the theatre. And then we retained them as we went on. So that was kind of very exciting. We were all into that kind of philosophy of bringing new people to the theatre and keeping them there. And also bringing the theatre to other contexts, like we had seen, you know, in the Ormond Multimedia Centre, and other places during those heady 90s period. So we pitched to John Reynolds, who was the owner of Electric Picnic at the time, and you know, we pitched to run a whole area there, and we name checked Panty, who Philly was working with a little bit at the time. We name checked Niall Sweeney. You know, we had to like find their numbers to call them to ask if we could name check them. They're like, oh, okay. So we name checked them. And then we got called in to have a meeting with John. And we were expecting, you know, to really have to pitch hard. And himself and Robbie Butler, his kind of second in command, just rolled down the site map. And they were like, right, here's where your tent is going to be. We're like, oh my God. So that was kind of a big jump for the company, and started exploring the kind of out of theatre strand, I suppose, which was massive for the company, because what started happening was people would see what we were doing in a field or in a club or in other places, and then they'd follow us into the theatre without really thinking about it, without really thinking, oh, we're going into the Abbey Theatre. It would be more, oh, we're just going to see those guys who did that thing down Electric Picnic. They're doing this other thing in this place called the Abbey, so we'll just hop along there.
And Jenny, what year was that, the Electric Picnic? What kind of...
That was 2008, 2009, 2010.
Okay. Because that really, I mean, you know, that did capture a moment. I mean, even for someone that wasn't into that scene, but kind of like looking at it from the outside, you kind of go, there's something big going on there. You know, there is, and I think, you know, from seeing your shows and, you know, as I said, following, you know, what you've been creating and making happen, there was a sense of walls coming down. It was like, and I love that question, like, what the fuck is this? Kind of go, well, it is what it is. Do you know what I mean? I think that's, I mean, from that to sitting in the opening night of Alice in Wonderland in the Abbey with a whole audience in there that were there for you guys. Do you know what I mean? And then that was kind of, but I suppose those early days of that, I think mashup is a kind of great word and an underused word, actually, of that kind of putting eclectic mix of people curated in under a tent. But the liveness, I suppose that's one thing about your work, which is incredible, that sense of it being alive and it being searching. And was that for you, like, how do you kind of, like, from doing the Electric Picnic, how do you kind of analyze that and kind of curate it then further? What's your process around that?
Well, at that point, just personally, I had moved from Corn Exchange to Dublin Fringe,
yeah,
and was in a programming position there, which is like, I really absolutely loved programming for a long time. So, you know, Electric Picnic was the first This Is Pop Baby opportunity to really let loose on that,
yeah.
with myself and Philly's aesthetic. And I guess we're always, in terms of like, how do we put something together or what are we thinking of? I think a strength of both of ours is that we're thinking of the moment to moment audience experience all the time. And so, and also our tastes are, I don't know if they would be considered such now, but like at the time our tastes were, you know, pushing it, you know, our tastes were definitely quite punk and quite radical. So, you know, people would see things that they have never seen before, you know, and there'd be a tent full of a couple of thousand people, you know, with their mouths hanging open. And then a thing that we started playing with was, where can we take the audience from moment to moment? How can we bring them to a certain place and pull the rug out of them using what we know from theatre? How can we put a theatrical monologue right in the middle at 1 a.m. at Electric Picnic and hold the audience, you know, followed by, you know, the stuff that we know is going to work, which is like really fun drag queens doing an incredible number. So we started playing with kind of like messing with the audience's journey. And there was really something in that, and something that I still haven't seen to the extent that This Is Pop Baby have played with over the years, you know, and we got better at it, and we refined it a lot in our work club, which of course was, you know, was in the basement of the Abbey Theatre, so it was really rooted in theatre. And ultimately, between Electric Picnic, between work club, between Queer Notions, like all of that fed into what became Riot.
Yeah. And come here, you mentioned there as well, because you know, lest one forget, along that time you were also with the Fringe, having come from Corn Exchange, and like there was a whole other piece of you, you know, that was. I mean, obviously, you know, you can't, you know, split yourself in 3 or 4 and kind of not have influences across, but to kind of facilitate and curate and program other people's work, is that something, you know, that you like as well? Not just that.
Yeah, of course. I was very passionate about it for a number of years, and my passion has moved more in towards making now. But yeah, I got a massive kick out of it. Dublin Fringe is a great place to work because you can really get a sense of the whole entire city in one swoop, and you hear from people way outside the normal, you know, theatre box that you live in, or other certain boxes that you live in. So it's an amazing place to work. I went on to work in the Festival World Cultures with Jodie Ackland for a year, which was another brilliant experience. I worked in Gaze Film Festival. And then I went on to put together and program festivals in Australia and in Singapore. And all of that programming experience is really, really valuable, you know, because you can think in a really 360 way about putting a program together, you know, in terms of technical, how it will work technically, how it works. Scheduling is half the issue, you know, and how it will work audience wise. So that was.
But I think as well, I mean, there's kind of, you know, we get the international bit in a minute, but I think there's also, you mentioned producing and you're curating and programming, but there's the practicalities of a tent in the field. Do you know what I mean? There's the practicalities of kind of going, oh, we have these amazing ideas of bringing artists and, you know, tone, but then there's generators and there's health and safety and do you, like, how does your kind of art rub up against that? So I'm most fascinated in kind of is that something that just kind of wrecks your head, or is that kind of meat to you?
Oh no, that's like the stuff of it. You know, you kind of like, you're made by the restrictions around you. So putting something on in a greenfield site in particular is particularly satisfying, you know, because you build it from the ground up. And I guess the work has to be a certain level of robustness, you know, for it to survive all of that. And the artists have to be very, very comfortable. You know, people wander in and wander straight out all the time, the same way that we all do at festivals. So yeah, you know, you have to program things for different times of day and so on. But no, absolutely loved that context. It's the most fun place, I would say, to put on work.
And when was the Sydney, Singapore? When did that happen for you?
That happened in 2011.
Okay.
Yeah. So my now husband booked all the music at Electric Picnic and a number of other festivals, and he was offered a job in Australia to do a festival inspired by Electric Picnic, and then they offered me the job of putting together the arts program. So we started doing this kind of crazy thing of essentially working in 2 different hemispheres. So we were over and back. You know, it was a kind of terrible time in Ireland at that time, but it was a very emotional time. Or not emotional, it was still a very exciting time for This Is Pop Baby, and it was an exciting time for Declan with Pod Entertainment. So we didn't feel that we wanted to emigrate and leave all that behind. We thought this was a kind of means to an end. So this festival, because the owners of the festival, it's called Harvest Festival, because the owners of the festival really knew nothing about arts and decor and the kind of site management of that. I ended up programming the arts, but really designing the site as well, and designing most of the decor, and really having a hand in everything, you know, from food offerings to, you know, signage on site, etc., etc. So it was just a brilliant A to Z of running a festival. And then Declan started his own festival in Singapore called Neon Lights, and so I learned about the other aspects, you know, raising the capital and all the other blanks that I had to fill in. And so I kind of came out of that 5 years knowing absolutely everything there is to know about putting a festival together. So it was enormously valuable, very challenging and tiring, but very valuable.
And also working in completely different cultural contexts. I mean, you know, being in Australia, obviously, but like Singapore, I'd imagine there's, you know, it's just different.
Yeah, it's extremely, Singapore is a tough nut to crack, and really interesting place, really amazing scene, but quite underground. There's essentially no social welfare there.
Okay.
So none of the artists are just artists, you know, they all have to play many, many roles because there's no dole, you know, so you can't be out of work. That's just not a thing. But then on the flip side of it, in Singapore, they have, from a policy point of view, recognized that arts and culture are a massive business competitive advantage. So they pump quite a lot of resources into it.
Okay.
So yeah, very, very interesting. It's quite sensorial, you know, so you have to submit absolutely everything that you're going to do and say and visualize to a censorship board, essentially. Okay. Yeah, it's called the media developers, media something. But anyway, fascinating. I could go off on a tangent.
And come here, I mean, like, as during that period of time when you were kind of, you know, I'd say working between two hemispheres, This Is Pop Baby machine kind of started to go on to, I said that, to go on to another level, kind of, which ended at that kind of process, I suppose, in the Abbey. But before that, there was Work Like Trade, you know, which now obviously has morphed into Rialto, the movie, and then kind of the Year of Magical Wanking, back in 2011. But I suppose was that like, and was Queer Notions still going on around? Was that around that time as well, or had that gone?
Queer Notions was 2009, 2010.
Yeah. Okay. So, but how did you manage that? I mean, did you like, was that very difficult to kind of have your one foot in either continent, I suppose?
Yeah, it was. It was difficult for me, and it was difficult for Philip. It really was. However, it also opened up lots of opportunities. So actually during that time, our new work shrunk, but our international touring grew quite a bit because I was in a position to be able to set up tours and develop all those relationships, obviously in Australia in particular. Yeah. So we did like multiple tours in that time frame, and we developed very good relationships in Australia, which led on to, you know, greater touring opportunities once I came back.
And what sort of work were you touring around that time, Jenny?
We toured the Year of Magical Wanking to Australia. Okay. And we toured all of Panty shows to Australia.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because you look back, and it's not that long ago, but you look back over the kind of 8, 9, 10 years in Ireland, and, you know, This Is Pop Baby has been woven through so much of the the cultural zeitgeist, again, horrible word, but that the sense of, as things have emerged both on a socio and a political and an aesthetic way, your work has been kind of to the forefront of that, both, and the internationalism, I think, in relation to Irish culture as well, but in that space that you occupy, which is that kind of hybrid, or that kind of, which must be amazingly exciting to see that kind of emergence of the work that you've been part of.
Yeah, it's very, very, very satisfying. You kind of think, we're always striving, and we're always, continuing down various rabbit holes, but you kind of think, gosh, if this is all it is, then, maybe that's enough. It's been exhilarating to kind of see the impact and to see the influence of the work over the years.
Yeah. I mean, and talk to me then about Alice in, like, were you back for that, or were you kind of?
Yeah.
I was going to say, how do you work that from kind of the other side of the world? But I mean, that was, again, like, there's moments in time in the last decade, and that was certainly one. When, such an amazing piece, but also what it was about and the way it was formed, and I mean, stupid question, but that must be very exciting.
Yeah, it was thrilling. So there's a couple of things. So that was years in the making, and it finally ended up, being slated for the Abbey main stage, and it was the first original musical there in like 30 years. And also, not very many people were doing musicals at the time. Like, everybody's doing musicals now, but actually at that time, it wasn't, it wasn't, front and center in work. And so, it was exciting in its ambition, and it was exciting in its form, but mainly you really felt like the whole city was behind you. Like, it was plastered all over buses. Philly and I would be walking down the street, and people would be like, "Good luck," because I guess Fiach McAneil, who was director of the Abbey at the time, kind of took this punt, and it really did throw open the doors of the Abbey. We had 56% new audience to the Abbey for that show. And and you had people coming in, and then the cleaners finding bags of cans. Not that I'm advocating that, but it was brilliant, and it was taken up building wide with activations from front of house team and box office team and the bar staff. And so it was a very exciting time. And there was one night we did our club downstairs, and then the musical, it was one of the last weekends upstairs. So we kind of had the run of the building for one beautiful night.
Wow. But I think you're right. But I think, if you look at that trajectory kind of in, say, mainstream theatre, from work kind of in the basement, say, in the Peacock, and then to have that main stage with a musical and with something which is kind of, beyond, I think it's important to say, beyond all those things we're talking about now, which are kind of cultural, zeitgeisty, I mean, the work stood. Do you know what I mean? It was kind of, as a piece of work, I mean, some of the music of that is still in my head. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's and so many people at a point in their careers were kind of there together on that stage. You know what I mean? It was kind of, it was one of those both a landing stage, but also a jumping off point, let's say, for an awful lot of work. And then, I think what's great about your work is it kind of like a concertina. It can kind of go into small, and I mean small as in small scale. And then, like Alice in Wonderland, and then what was coming a few years later with kind of Riot. But between that, there was Elevator, and again, Philly's work, I'm Your Man, and that's it. But also, like, how long was that idea for Riot? Was that kind of percolating, in relation to the kind of, I suppose, societal changes that were happening through all those periods that we're just talking about there? But how long was Riot in the making for you, Jenny?
like quite a while. And it was quite influenced with a really, actually, you know, loads of our shows start off with the most practical kind of produce serial idea. You know, Alice, for example, was fully going, let's do a Christmas musical and get loads of corporates in. You know, and that was like, you know, the very, you know, starting point. And Riot was me seeing all these Spiegeltown shows in Australia and the popularity of them, and the kind of success of them, and thinking about this magic that we had created in the likes of Work, in the likes of Electric Picnic, and also in moments in the stage shows, and kind of thinking, we should do one of these. We should do one of these shows, but this is Pop Baby version and an all Irish version. So the simplest of simple ideas. And so we applied to the Arts Council and we got refused. So it was called Work the Show. And they said, no, we don't fund clubs. And we said, okay, well, that's not what we said, but okay, Grant. And so we reframed it. In fairness to the Arts Council, with lots of feedback and advice from the Arts Council, and we got a little bit of money, and then we used it to develop some pieces in a big work in Imma. So, for example, there's a collective in Riot called the Sirens, the singing group. They were formed in Imma, and a number of other parts of the show was created in Imma. So that's like 2013, 2014. So it was already in train around 2012. Then we applied again and got refused again. And then we like made a case for it. You know, we said, this is what we want to do. This is what we're compelled to do. And through actually, you know, the rigor of feedback from the Arts Council, we really had to ensure that it had a kind of dramaturgical backbone. So that ended up, of course, being its strength.
Yeah.
You know, was this dramaturgical, textual weaving us through the journey of it. Of course, from Emmett Kerwin and also from Panty.
Yeah, and I think it's funny, you said the word compelled there. Is that, do you feel compelled when you kind of get something? Is that compulsion to kind of, you have to make this? Is that kind of, is there a drive like that in you, Jenny?
Definitely, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and come here, tell me then, I mean, obviously then, you know, Riot, 2016, date set, Dublin Fringe Festival, Spiegel 10 to it. But again, that a monster of a show, you know, and particularly, you know, it seems to maybe coalesce both, say, this is Pop Baby, but from talking to you now, an awful lot of your own beliefs, for want of a better word, or vision around the kind of inclusion, equality, politics. You know, that was all there, but worn in the best way, worn very lightly. Do you know what I mean? And I don't mean that as in any kind of softer way, but worn very, like, was that when it came down to the last few weeks, was that a kind of a maelstrom of, oh Jesus, now we have to do the show?
When it came down to the last few weeks, we were we made every euro stretch like 6 times the amount for that show. So we had a staggered rehearsal process. You know, we only had the full cast in tech, really. Right. You know, Megan Reardon was in once. She could do like a couple of sessions. So we were really cobbling this thing together. You know, we had worked out the text quite a bit with Emmett and Panty in advance, but still we were flying by the seats of our pants. We would never be able to recreate what we did there. Like there's a pretty funny story, because the show ended up in Dublin Dance Festival a number of years later. And it was only on the first day of rehearsals that Philly and I were whispering to each other, and we went, do you think we need a movement director for this? Oh, will we ask Up and Over it? And we just toddled along to Up and Over it and asked them to be movement directors on the first day of rehearsal. And it ended up being in Dublin Dance Festival. So we were all like flying by the seat of our pants. But like, it's definitely shared values of myself and Philip. And, you know, it was really, really clear what we wanted it to be, you know, like we knew what we could do with all the shows and all the clubs. We knew that magic that we could create. We had messed around before with the audience's journey. We had a structure for the show. It was a really simple structure that everything fed into. And then so we just like put it together in the maddest way. I remember watching the final rehearsal run through, and I was chewing a pool noodle that the Lords of Strut use in their Whooping Jesus scene. I was just chewing it, going, "Oh my God, this is terrible!" You know. And then we had our first preview, and how it goes is there's a tiny bit of song, then Emmett does his first spoken word piece, and he finishes with the words, "This is riot," and there's a bong sound, and the cast, which have gathered in a family portrait behind him, do this head nod thing, and then there's another bong, and they all explode out into this big opening sequence. So Emmett comes on and he does his opening piece, and he says, "This is riot," and the tent explodes.
Wow.
And no one on stage can hear their cues. You know, like the tent just goes nuts. And so they're all just winging it, doing these head nods and exploding out, and they're just operating on pure adrenaline for the rest of the show. You know, no one can hear, Panty can't hear herself because everyone is just like, so, you know, it caught a moment. Yeah.
I mean, well, like, because my next question was kind of, when did you know? But obviously from very early you knew there was something there.
We did, and we had done a dress earlier on to all the Fringe Festival volunteers. Not a smile, not a laugh, nothing. We were like, it's a flop. No, look, I knew it was going to work. I was so confident it was going to work. Like, I've never been more confident about anything in my life. But I didn't know it would work to that extent.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And if you look back on that show, it's pretty messy, you know. We just about got away with it, but we refined it and we toured it, and you know, we never stopped working on it. And then the show, I don't know if you caught the very last show in Vicar Street in Dublin Dance Festival. I mean, that was a proper show. I think like we can stand behind that and go, you know, that is a great show.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, you know, you said yourself, there's knowing something is going to work, and then, but my God, I mean, that just, the last 3 or 4 years, it's exploded. I mean, list out some of the places that show has been for me, will you?
Yeah, it went to New York, it went to Sydney, Melbourne, Toronto. That was it, actually. Wow. So, yeah.
But I mean, but again, I said it's not two actors and, you know, a backdrop. It's a massive show.
Yeah.
With a lot of moving parts, and then never mind the physicality of the piece and the amount of actors and dancers, but also the staging of it is, it might look simplistic, you know, in its aesthetic, but it's freaking huge. You know.
Yeah, 21 people on the road.
Wow.
So it was really difficult to move around. And also we had, I don't know the exact number, but the amount of mics in that show is, you know, nearly more than Riverdance, you know. So difficult show to move, but yeah, we had a great time touring it, and it was most satisfying, I think, to see how it landed in New York. People really went for it. It felt like people really needed it, and that was an amazing feeling.
Yeah, I mean, what I loved about it was, and particularly when I saw the last iteration in Vicar Street was it had that celebratory, you know, joyful tone, but it was like, but also we're not done yet. Do you know what I mean? Also, there's, yes, let's celebrate who we are and, you know, hope and joy and love, but there's shit there as well that needs to be excavated and kind of dealt with. And I think that to kind of hold those two opposites together was what, for me, what made it special. Do you know what I mean? That kind of sense of, yes, you can have great crack, but look at this, or listen to this. And is that something that was there for you from the word go? That kind of sense of, when you say not letting the audience kind of know what's coming next, but also that sense of sticking people's face in I think the Oscar Wilde phrase, you know, the gutter and the stars, I think that really kind of fits with Riot. I think that's kind of the sense of,
yeah, I mean, it's kind of a trick. Like, it's like a theater trick. It's like if you get people to a certain place where they're totally with you and they're really comfortable and they're having a great time, you can hit them really, really hard in the stomach. Yeah. And you do not see it coming, but they are with you, you know, and they are open and they are ready to listen to you.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, you know, every act in the piece was singing the same tune, even though it was like the Lords of Strut doing a 80s dance routine, you know, next to Emmett Curran's amazing Heartbreak poem. Like, they're all saying the same thing, which is like the same thing that we say in all our shows. You know, it's about like active citizenship. It's about, you know, community. It's about, you know, creating a better world together. You know, it's about the power of the dance floor. It's about the power of dressing up and having fun, the transformational power of having fun, you know. So they're kind of motifs that just bring the work along.
Yeah. And then, you know, there's where we're from kind of has emerged over the last few years. But like the work again, you know, of This Is Pop Baby with Evo Guitar Flynn and Veronica Dias and Tony Watt, you know, those next three pieces of work, or those three pieces of work, became, I suppose, very, sociopolitic's the wrong word, but like very, you know, they were very thematic in relation to what they were exploring, and I think that's fascinating, just from an outsider looking at from the back of Riot into that space, and I think that. Yeah, I mean, can you just talk about those three pieces? I mean, they're not obviously three very separate pieces, but those three pieces and kind of how they emerge for you.
So which ones?
Sorry, not a funny word, that Tara's work, and then Here and Now, the Veronica Dias, you know, and then Tony's.
So two of those three pieces were part of our Where We Live program.
Yeah.
And Where We Live is a very, very different tone and timbre to the likes of Riot and a lot of the work that we've done before, and a really welcome one, you know. So we're kind of obsessed with Dublin City, you know. The city, and by extension the country, has always been kind of a character in This Is Pop Baby's work. Like, everything we do feeds into the city, is inspired by the city. It's a really big part of everything that we do. And as you say, we were becoming more and more kind of socially and politically engaged in the work, you know. So the work went from being, you know, queer to engaging in all sorts of politics, expanding out from there. So Where We Live was a response to the city, and by dint of what the artists wanted to talk about, it became very kind of socially and politically driven. So, and it was framed within St. Patrick's Festival. So it was like this kind of black sheep festival of work that was talking about what's really going on, you know, in Ireland, in a challenging way, but also in a celebratory way. So that was, we've done two iterations of that, nearly.
Yeah. But in relation, I mean, you kind of go right back to you know, your formation, and even before that, from your own kind of aesthetic and kind of your own kind of, you know, explorations, that, let's say. But the kind of, it strikes me that the idea of what's mainstream and what's accessible and what, you know, driving from kind of a queer culture or from other types of, you know, what would have been seen to be outsider, kind of seems to be at the heart of an awful lot of what you do. And I think, have you noticed the changes in that, in a socio-political or a cultural way in the previous kind of 10 or 15 years as your work has evolved, or as you've evolved as people?
Definitely. I think that, you know, there are a lot of theatre companies that came up behind us who, you know, carried that kind of torch and made it their own. Outsider Stories is at kind of at the crux of what we do, you know, and that goes right the way back to me talking about how my segue from my life gave me that kind of outsider perspective. And of course, Ireland has changed demographically. Ireland has, you know, the massive social change that has happened in the country in the past 5 or 6 years is kind of all about outsider perspective in a way. So I think it's like it's essential and vital and feels very alive at the moment.
Yeah. And so talk to me then about, obviously there was, you know, you're one of the organizations that were really, really hit by the timing, let's say, of shutdowns in this country. Because as I say, where we live, it kind of mirrors in a way, just when you're mentioning it there, that the relationship of, say, work to the National Theatre, you know, and what that kind of grew into on by taking over the bloody place eventually. But in relation to the positioning of those voices within the kind of St. Patrick's Festival, but also the different audiences then that you're bringing. You know, again, you're kind of have access to, that's at St. Patrick's Day kind of branding, or, you know, family, but also then your own audience kind of coming up against that, and the work that's kind of emerged from that, you know, like Sherlock and Fuck It, you know, I just say Here and Now, and so I think there's stuff about bringing, you also have a great skill in bringing stuff on from its genesis, if that makes sense. So like things might emerge through your work. Yeah, and I mean, you obviously love working with artists.
Yeah. So, and that's where the kind of there's a big programming and development side to what we do. In, you know, we started in Electric Picnic very much in queer notions, and then really hitting its pinnacle in Where We Live. Like the Where We Live that was about to go on, we had 80 artists engaged, and the 4 anchor pieces were pieces that we were making ourselves or very, very closely producing. So that, you know, we had commissions involved there that we were developing. So yeah, we absolutely love working with a kind of the extended This Is Pop Baby family, and a lot of artists feel like This Is Pop Baby is their natural home, and in an ideal world we would be home to lots of artists all the time. And I think we're very well placed to do that, should the Arts Council like to fund us for a lot of money. But it's rich. It all feeds into everything, you know. It's and it's just brilliant to be in a position to be able to do that. So Where We Live 2020, which really was our biggest, most ambitious project that we've ever done, because we were not just programming the whole thing, we were producing the majority of it, but we were also making the core program as well, which is like a totally ridiculous thing to do.
Nah. Yeah, but and then you had one night where you opened and closed.
Yeah. So it was Thursday the 12th of March, and you know, we knew this was coming down the road. We had rehearsal protocol, and blah 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 blah. But we thought that we might squeak through. And we certainly thought that. Then we started thinking maybe, 8 of the 10 days of the festival would squeak through. And there was a series of events on Thursday, the 12th of March, the dominoes started falling from early in the morning. Like one artist pulled out. Then Karen from St. Patrick's Festival rang and she said, I'm pulling everything. And then we had a big emergency meeting. And then Leo, it's going to be schools. It's going to be schools. And so we had a childcare plan in place, but we were going in, but we were also like ringing our elderly parents and saying, hey, don't come to the opening tonight. It's going to be 300 people squeezed into Project Art Centre. We had a big opening event planned. And so then, of course, the announcement was made and we were closed down.
Yeah.
So it was really surreal, and it was surreal in how kind of sanguine we all were, because there was nothing we could do. We did something beautiful, which is everyone just naturally finished their work, so the designers and the technicians, the production managers, we finished everything. The opening show was the show I was directing, so I finished it, and we ran the show for a small audience of our extended team, and that was it. The building was locked behind us.
Wow.
And for the next 3 months, the festival set and all the decor just lay as it was in the building, like a ghost festival.
Wow. I mean, not that you would ever want to be in that, but it's kind of in a way somehow fitting that the company that has been at the heart of so much socio-political change and was kind of the one that was kind of left in ether, but I mean, the trauma of that, that's hard. I mean, and that's kind of, we're all in this kind of weird space for the last 4 months, and we don't know how it's going to kind of emerge out of it. And we're looking, but I mean, to have to be also letting that go while also trying to look at current situations, that's not easy.
It's not easy, and it's not processed really fully, like it's like with everybody, it's kind of an unfolding situation, but there have been benefits as well, because the company was running so hard and so fast that, I don't know if we would have made it past this year anyway. It was becoming extremely impossible. It was but it was the circumstances to making work were impossible. Like everybody was, we really pride ourselves on what we pay people and the conditions that we create. We've for a long time we've been up there with Abbey rates or as close to as we can get to, but everything was just so squeezed. And the people who were working longest on the project were fee-based, so they were ultimately getting paid the least, and so everything was really on its knees.
Yeah.
And we, I don't talk about this a lot, and we don't talk about this a lot because we kind of manage our public messaging within very strict parameters, but the truth is that I don't know if the company would have survived past this year anyway. So what the break has meant that firstly we get to pause. It's been absolutely rock and roll for a few years, and we've gotten to take stock, and hopefully there's a lot of work lost. There's a lot of work lost. There's tours, there's the Eurovision creative directorship, there's a DTF premiere, and that's just within the company. Philly and I also had individual work, but I feel really positive about the longevity of the company. in a way because of this. So
yeah, I mean, I think, again, looking from the outside in, I think, that for a lot of people, and from the arts in general, where it's all very traumatic, but I think there is an opportunity for us all to take stock and kind of, well, I suppose in a way, look what we're doing and look what we're willing to do, and look, I always find it's very easy to say, oh, that shouldn't be happening, but actually, they're all choices. The way the industry works is choices made by many different people individually, but when you can't make the choices anymore, when we're reopening, it's kind of, now we're making the choices whether to be the same or whether to do something a bit different. But also, I mean, I think, yeah, it's exciting in some ways to kind of hear you saying that, because I think, there's going to be a new as we kind of emerge, and probably at different stages over the next couple of years. And to have this as Pop Babies kind of framing around that, I think is hugely important, both from an aesthetic point of view, but also just from a support network, and from that type of, from work that wouldn't have happened, from people that wouldn't have got that foothold, and for yourself and Philly to kind of have that frame to explore what is sometimes is madness, that we all kind of inhabit. I mean, you mentioned the Eurovision. I mean, that will happen again. But I was kind of never so. I remember either texting or emailing Philly around time going, geez, that's you kind of get the excitement around that by just reading the announcement. And I think that sort of, those marriages are there to be re-wed into the future. So it's great to hear you being positive, I suppose, is my long-winded way of saying that. And I think you're right, there is this kind of saving grace in the fact that we're all in it together, overused phrase, but we all have had to put a stop on it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very, very different, currently, it's a very, very different paradigm than the recession was. And I think that, there's great unity at the moment in the arts sector led by NCFA. And I didn't see that before. That wasn't present in the last crisis. The sector turned on itself, much to the delight, of government, who didn't have to do anything, but now, we're cohesive, and we're unified, and we're getting results. And we're also really used to this kind of world. We're used to ambiguity. We're used to creating 3 different future scenarios. We're used to working to very, very short, 6-month imaginings of what the future will hold. So in a way, I think, particularly if people went through the financial crisis as well, I think we're pretty kind of well placed to psychologically weather this.
Yeah.
Our personal choice from a creative point of view is to not try to replicate the live experience with any other projects. We had, we thought about it and we were approached and so on, but what's really been clarified for me is what we do is about assembly. We bring people together, and then we present something that, you've seen the quotes about everybody's heartbeat beating at the same time, and that, in my opinion, that's what we're in the business of.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, you're absolutely right. And I say there's a sense as well that, there's new adventures to be made, but as I say, that paradigm doesn't work for you at the moment. But also you mentioned there, particularly, and I think this is what's happened, I don't know if you agree, but over the last, particularly this campaigning, there's been a really kind of letting down of boundaries between the funded sector, the entertainment sector, the event sector, and and musicians, because before it was all factions, but now and I think an awful lot that's been driven by crew that kind of work between all arenas and kind of going, we are all in this together. Some of us have never been in Arts Council funded venues or shows. Some of us work in the music industry. But I think there's been a real opportunity taken to all really realize that we're all in the one tribe.
And I think that that will become increasingly a reality, as, the models for things that were considered commercial really don't exist anymore. So the models for commercial music to the models for commercial comedy, they only exist the same as in theater at the very, highest level of success with the lowest level of overheads, so I think that will, I was thinking about this the other day. I think that will become increasingly the case, where actually a greater proportion of art will require subsidy in a smaller market.
Yeah.
Investment, not subsidy.
Yes, my favorite word.
Yeah, yeah.
Come here. I'm not going to keep it for much longer. But I'm just fascinated from, you mentioned like the first This Is Pop Baby kind of joining of Danny and Chantel, and I think there's a real sense of that different socio-politic spaces, which is kind of fascinating, from say working class communities to queer to gay to LGBTQ, to and to kind of spaces within that. But it's also that, and it kind of in the way Alice in Wonderland is a kind of great example of it. It's not like that Wizard of Oz. The more you kind of enter mainstream, you realize that there is no Wizard of Oz, that it's all just made up. Those divisions are just there for purposes, and a lot of time purposes that people that made them have forgotten why they're there. And I suppose what you've done, particularly the arts, is because an awful lot of times when people reach that place of, quote unquote leadership or quote unquote groundbreaking or all those words, is there's a retraction when you kind of hit that open space, and the open space of, Alice in Wonderland or Riot or, where we're from, when kind of ground opens up. But there's that kind of frontierism aspect to your work, which is always seem for that kind of pushing those, not boundaries, but like exploring those boundaries. And that's still as fresh now as it was back in the day.
It's definitely still as fresh. I tell you what, though, it's scarier. So it's scarier because there's, even with Alice in Wonderland, which was a massive deal, I really felt like in terms of before and after, it was really riot, like we kind of felt like we could get away with anything. We could do whatever we wanted. We weren't skipping to anybody's beat. We even though what we were doing was landing and landing and landing and landing, like the stakes never felt burdensome, and then post riot, when suddenly like everybody we're looking at us like we're being talked about as an established theatre company, people think that we're revenue funded, there's just like a whole different perception of the company as leaders, and as at the vanguard. And so, you have to do a very, very conscious decision to actively forget about that in order to make anything that is authentic,
Yeah. So it's nearly about destroying your own legacy as you go.
You just have to keep your eyes on the task immediately in front of you, when in terms of making, and then the bigger picture stuff is outside that.
Well, I'm going to leave it at that, because that's actually one of the best pieces of advice you could ever give to any theatre maker or arts maker or whatever you want to call it, from producing to writing, is keep your eyes on the task ahead of you. Because I think so much other shite comes in, and so much other, it kind of just, you can get bogged down and stuff, but it's that piece that is that's key. Jenny, it's been an absolute joy to chat to you. Thanks a million for kind of coming on, and best of luck in the future, and I'm sure I'll be kind of crossing paths many more times over the next couple of years.
Brilliant. Hope to see you inside a theatre soon.
I know.
Thanks, Mark.
Bye.